Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Glad you're here. I want to present to you the Mike Slater working plan for how to get back to whatever the heck we're gonna get back to. First thing to remember, remember, the point of the hammer the last few months was not to end the virus or eliminate the virus or kill the virus. The whole point of this, the shutdown, the whole point of it was to prevent a spike in healthcare demand and prevent an overwhelming of the healthcare system. That was the point. Other than New York City, we're well under capacity nationwide, and that's great news. Maybe there's another city here too I'm missing here, but for the most part, we're well under capacity, and that's wonderful. Let's celebrate that. That's fantastic. Compared to what could have been, wonderful. But that's the first reality. Second reality, there's the assumption that something like 70% of people or so are going to get this eventually. And again, we just wanted to make sure it wasn't all at the same time. But since we're so far under the healthcare capacity line, I live in San Diego, we're in California, we are way under the healthcare capacity line. Isn't it not only safe, but wise to start letting some people go out into the world? And when you do that, a certain percentage will get it and nothing will happen. A smaller percentage will get it and get a little sick, and a smaller percentage will get it and get very sick, and an even smaller percentage will die. But again, the goal was never to prevent everyone from getting sick ever again from COVID. That wasn't the point. So I think now it's time, right? We talked about the hammer and then the dance. I think it's time to start the dance. Let some people go out. And because wouldn't it be true that the longer we social distance now, we're delaying the inevitable and setting ourselves up for a potentially worse spike in the future? Right? If we all wait around for another month and then 80% of us go back to work right away, the spike's gonna be enormous. It'd be like nothing, it's like we didn't do anything, right? It's like, what was the point of everything we just did if we all go back to normal? But if maybe now 20% of us go back to work and go do things, then the spike there'll be an increase, but it'll be completely manageable. And that's the point, to keep it under the healthcare capacity line. So 2 questions. First, what things should people be allowed to do, right? Because we don't want people to do things that cause a ton of spread. That doesn't make any sense. But the other question is, who should be let free? I want to address the who today. Now, the good news about this is the government doesn't need to decide this. They don't need to manage this. The government doesn't need to say, well, everybody with last names between A and G, you guys are allowed to leave for the next month. Like, the government doesn't need to do that. Because the total hunch, but I have this belief that people have already put themselves into pretty evenly distributed groups of when they feel comfortable going out and doing things. So let's back it up just a second. I want to make an analogy here. So in technology world, there are 5, I think we have a little graph of this. There's 5 categories of technology adopters. You see on the far left, you have innovators. What is that, like 2% of people or so? Then you have early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. So the innovators are the people who are most likely to take a risk on buying a new technology, right? So these are the people who are gonna buy a 3D curved TV just because it's new and they need it right away. Or they need the newest iPhone, like they're standing in line every single time there's a new iPhone. And it's a small percentage of people. And they're extreme, but that's okay. And in COVID land, we know who they are, right? These are the protesters who are out protesting because the government said they can't do something and they want to do the opposite, right? And they're not going to wear a mask because it's an infringement on my rights or whatever. So they're ready to go. They're the innovators. Great. Let them go. Let them take the risk. You don't need to crack down on them anymore. You did for the last 2 months. Perfect. Totally acceptable. I get it. I've been all in. But now let them go. Let the innovators do their thing. Then you have the early adapters. So in technology land, these are the people who will jump really early on a new tech trend, right? Right as people start to hear about it, they're going to do it. And in business, you really want to appeal to these people because these are the people who make a product cool, right? So in COVID land, these are the people who think this is overblown, right? They think this is all overblown. They've kind of been playing along with it, but now they're like, no, this has gone too far. And they're ready to make a statement about it, right? They're like, I have nothing. I'm not scared of anything. this is no big deal. I'm going, and they're going to go take selfies of themselves at the mall. They're the early adapters. Then you have the early majority. This is me probably, and technology too, right? So technology, these are people who make decisions based on utility and practical benefits as opposed to just like coolness and being there with the crowd. So it's not, I'm just gonna buy this new phone because it's new. It's, I don't know, is this phone way better? Is it worth it? Is the camera that much better? Nah, okay, maybe not, maybe it is, right? Early majority. In COVID, these are the people who wanna let others test the waters first, right? So this is where I would be, right? This is me. If everything opened up tomorrow, I probably wouldn't go anywhere for a couple of weeks, maybe a month. Just kind of see, how'd you early adapters do? How's everything? You okay? You dead yet? Everything's fine? Okay, all right, I guess I'll go to the restaurant now, right? And let other people dip their toe in the water, and then we'll kind of do the same a little bit. Like, what really are the risks of going out and about? Let's kind of see what happened to this other group. Then you have the late majority, right? Technology, these are people who need a little more hand-holding when they adopt a new technology, right? So these are the grandparents who just got a smartphone a couple of years ago and need you to walk them through how to, turn the flashlight on, something. In COVID, these are the people who are going to be very cautious, and it's fine. Total respect, totally understand it. They're going to need, maybe they're like 6 months. They're not going to go anywhere for maybe 6 months or so. See how things are going, and when they do come out, they're going to need a little more hand-holding, and that's fine. And then finally, you have the laggards. So in technology, they never adopt until they're forced to, right? So this is like, they don't make flip phones anymore. So Dad, you have to at least get an iPhone 5. Okay? It's the cheapest phone. They're giving them away. You have to get the smartphone. And in COVID, these are people who are never going to leave no matter what, unless they absolutely have to. And that may be fine too, because maybe they have different respiratory issues or weakened immune systems or whatever. Guys, can you throw the graph up one more time? I think people have kind of put themselves in their category themselves, right? So I'm the yellow, I'm the early majority. My wife's maybe the green, she's maybe the late majority. And I have total respect. I get everyone being in every position, every category, wherever you are. I think that's totally fine. I get everyone's reason for doing that. But let's let the 2% out. And then I think by next week, I think the early majority, what's that, 15? 13%? I think the 13% will probably go. And then, in a month or so, I think the 34% will go, and maybe another couple more months, right? I think that'll be fine. And the government doesn't have to determine who's in what group, just like they don't have to determine who buys the newest iPhone, right? They just let people figure that out on their own. The people who were on the beaches in San Diego and LA this weekend, they were the innovators. They're the 2.5%, right? They're gonna take a big risk, or the risk. Great, let them. Everyone else is watching them to see how it goes. That's fine, right? We can't keep people locked up forever. At the end of the show, we're gonna talk about the word quarantine. It's an Italian word. It literally means 40 days. It was a policy they had in Venice in the 1300s. If a new ship came into port, it had to sit outside of port for 40 days before they could go in to the city. I don't know why they chose 40 days. I don't know if they had any medical reasons for doing that, or if it was like a Jesus thing, like 40 days, 40 nights. I have a feeling, though, it's just because they knew the limits of human behavior. They knew that you could really only keep someone tucked away for 40 days for no real reason until people started to freak out. And we're past the 40 days, and that's good. It's been good. I'm not questioning what we did. I think it's fine. It's good. Well, listen, it's difficult and all that, but I think it was necessary. I should say that. I think it was necessary. But now, let people go out. See what happens. The longer the government waits to let us do things, the longer until we can all get the data that we need to make up our own minds on what we feel comfortable doing. And if we were anywhere near healthcare capacity, then I would not be talking like this. I'd have a completely different story. If our hospitals were full, I'd be like, whoa, we're definitely not ready yet. But a lot of these hospitals are empty. Some of them are closing because there's no people in them. Herd immunity got a bad rap because the Brits just wanted to do nothing at first and just let the chips fall wherever they may, and just whoever dies, right? That probably wasn't the best thing, but herd immunity got a bad rap. But herd immunity, if it's possible, because there's some immunity things that we're not quite aware of yet, but if it's the only way out. The only way out is herd immunity. The only thing is you gotta let people, it's gotta happen over a longer period of time, maybe a year or longer. And that's fine. But There's no need to keep everyone locked up. Don't even know why you'd want to do that. Maybe if we knew, like if you could tell me, Slater, in November with 100% certainty we're going to have a vaccine, then maybe you could make that argument, hey, everyone locked down to November. I don't think you could, but right, you know what I'm saying? But we have no idea when we're going to get vaccines or whatever. So the only way out is to build immunity and let people go out over time. And we'll see what happens. If 70% of people get it and there's a 1% death rate, that's 1.7 million. See, this is why this is the best idea I have. It's still 1.7 million people die. Right, that's amazing. It's a ton of people. Only 400,000 people died in World War II, and we're still talking about 1.7 million people potentially dying. If 70% of adults get it, and there's a 1% death rate, that's 1.7 million Americans. It's still a ton, but it's the best idea I have so far. You got something better? Because you can't keep everyone locked up forever, and you can't let everyone just go back to normal tomorrow. But it's time to start talking about the dance. I got 1 minute. Let me do this quick. Message to politicians. Stop with the crackdowns. You don't need to crack down on people right now. We're past that. The problem with the government is they take so long to adapt or change their strategies that they're still nitpicking over that last 0.1% of people who want to go to the skate park or don't be petty. I'll give you an example. Laredo, Texas. The Laredo Police Department, they were given an anonymous tip that 2 women were running a beauty salon from their home. So the police staged an undercover sting operation, and they arrested a 31-year-old after she allegedly tried to provide an undercover officer with a manicure. Wow. Another 20-year-old was arrested for performing an eyelash service on an undercover cop. Now listen, I want to get my eyelashes done again as much as the next gal. But I'm an early majority. I'm going to wait a month before I get my eyelids did. Is it like hair did? You get your hair did, you get your eyelids did or done? I'm going to wait a month, okay? But if that person wants to go get their eyelids done or eyelids done, whatever girls do, if you want to do that now, let us know. You don't need undercover sting operations and throwing people in the slam or putting them in the pokey for giving a manicure. Problem is governments don't evolve quickly. And I fear we're going to be doing this hammer longer than we need to. And then there's going to be too much pushback on that. And then things don't go as well as they could be going. Coming up, we're going to talk with a doctor, Dr. Sapphire. We're going to talk with BETHANY Mandel about homeschool. And then maybe if we have a minute, we'll wrap up and we'll talk about that Venice policy a little more. Do that next. True story. Mike Slater, glad you're here. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So yesterday we talked to a virologist, tried to get deep into the science of viruses and all that. And now I want to get a little more of the medicine of it all. Dr. Nicole Sapphire is with us. She's a doctor in the New York City area, Fox News contributor, and has a new book out called Make America Healthy Again. Dr. Sapphire, how are you today?
Hey, thanks for having me on.
I'm glad you're here. So let's talk a little bit about COVID first. One thing that I was surprised by, and I want to get your take, is, first of all, just in general, how little we still know about this thing 4 months later. But even when it comes to symptoms. So I read here that 70% of patients in one New York City hospital didn't have a fever, and 40% had shortness of breath, which means still a majority didn't even have shortness of breath. If you asked me what the symptoms were, I'd say fever and shortness of breath. But it seems like that's certainly not even universal. It may not even be true for half of people. But just in general, are you surprised how wide the symptoms are and all the different variables at play?
Well, I mean, there's a reason it was called the novel coronavirus, because it's brand new. We knew nothing about it when it first started. And then even the information that we were given about it before it came to our country seemed to have been incorrect. So we're still trying to play catch up. And, we still get new information every single day. You're absolutely right that, people are presenting in various different ways with different symptoms. You have to remember, though, 25 to 50% of people who have the virus probably don't have any symptoms at all if they just have maybe even just like a sniffly nose or a small cough. So it's really hard to say. But those that are actually presenting to the hospital that are needing to be hospitalized, still a good majority of them tend to have fevers, tend to be shortness of breath. But to be honest, at this point, it seems like you can present with anything and you still could potentially have COVID-19.
Yes. So what do you, just in general, what do you do as a doctor? What mindset do you have in a crisis like this when you see patients?
Well, when this was all starting a few months ago, I just said to everybody, let's just pretend everyone has the virus, including yourself. And if you just assume that you have the virus and everyone else around you has the virus, then you're probably going to make some smart decisions on how you can halt the spread of that illness. But I also wanted to continue to tell people that the far majority of people who do get infected with the virus will be completely fine. But something that has been an increasing concern of mine are the indirect consequences that is coming from all of these orders when it comes to trying to mitigate the spread of this illness.
Like, can you go into more detail?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, let's start out with the vulnerabilities that have been highlighted with COVID-19 in the United States. For several reasons, if you look at the data from New York as well as other places across the country, over 90% of people who are dying or have severe illness have at least one pre-existing illness. And when you have 60% of American adults with at least one existing illness, including heart disease, diabetes, being overweight, that's a lot of people. So not only has that rendered us vulnerable and weakened our immune system to fight off the virus, but that's also why we had to make these makeshift hospitals so quickly, because our hospital systems were already functioning at near capacity because we have such existing illness in our country, and unfortunately, a lot of that which may be preventable. But one thing that now is being highlighted even more is all of these stay-at-home orders are, being extended, and you're starting to see people get, cabin fever. We're seeing increased calls for domestic violence, suicide, depression, anxiety, you name it. All of a sudden, all of the existing mental health that has been in our country is starting to take light, and I am concerned. We already know that you have increased risk of suicide and overdose deaths when it comes to unemployment. But now while we're all staying home, you potentially have victims with their abusers being forced to be together. So I really am imploring people to look at each individual community, and those that are able to start reopening, we need to do that.
Yeah, I wonder if, this is a genuine, honest question as you just brought up, I wonder if the epidemiologists take that into account when they're making their models and coming up with projections, if they take in the deaths of despair or whatever name you want to call all that. I don't know. I don't know how you can.
They don't. No, the models are, I mean, the reason that we have beaten all these models is because those models don't take into account the integrity or the resolve of the American people. They didn't assume that people would actually heed warning and stay home and slow the spread, but ultimately we did. But now that we have gotten more information about the virus, in the beginning when we knew nothing about this virus, this was all the right thing to do. We had to stop it because we didn't know how deadly it was going to be. But now that we've had several weeks of our own data and we are now getting to know a lot more about it, we can have to start using some of that information to do what's best for our country, for what's best for the people. And you can't just focus on the virus. You have to look at the direct and indirect consequences of it.
And that's totally right. That would be a perfect segue into your book. But I got one last question about COVID. And then we'll go to the book, I promise. You sent a tweet out about an article from ABC News about blood clots. So you're a doctor, so what's the connection you think there, and what's important about that?
So I work with, I diagnose cancer. That's my specialty. And so we know when you have inflammation in the body, that increases your risk for clotting, lower extremity, deep venous thrombosis, pulmonary embolisms, strokes, and heart attacks. Those are all examples of clots. And so what they've been reporting in now COVID-19 patients are an increased clotting. We've been seeing pulmonary embolisms on CT scans. My husband is an endovascular neurosurgeon who specializes in strokes, so he's also being called in for strokes. And so these are just various ways that COVID-19 is wreaking havoc amongst our population, which is why it is so important to continue decreasing the spread until we have effective treatments and potentially a vaccine down the road, because it's not just the flu. As we keep saying, there are severe symptoms that can come with COVID-19.
Interesting. All right, let's get to the book. Make America Healthy Again. Let's work backwards, if you don't mind. Your last chapter is about personal responsibility, which is obviously something we stand for here. And we've talked a lot about it when it comes to COVID, because there's certain things that are not in your control And if you focus on those, you'll have more anxiety. And there's certain things that are in your control. So even outside of the COVID context, how does personal responsibility, how have we not taken it properly? And what can we do in the future with it?
Well, so it's interesting that everything I talk about in my book, unfortunately, can be related to what we're seeing with COVID-19 right now. We know that our healthcare system is running at near max capacity. Governor Cuomo said himself that he was closing New York City hospitals because he wanted to expand Medicaid. So government stepped in, hospitals closed, and we had fewer hospital beds. So we know that we have fewer resources when it comes to treating people. Unfortunately, we have a large swath of people who are using hospital beds because of such chronic illness, but anywhere from 40 to 80% of that chronic disease could potentially have been prevented with lifestyle modifications, early detections, wellness checks, all those things that people kind of go, oh, come on. But the truth is they actually really make a big difference. People think I'm crazy when I say to them, there are a good amount of cancer that could actually have been prevented if, certain lifestyle behaviors were changed. And so there will always be illnesses that you can't do anything about. Take childhood leukemias, take type 1 diabetes, and as well, there's a long laundry list of things that you really can't do anything about to prevent. But unfortunately, we have such a large amount of disease that could potentially have been prevented that all of our resources are being spread thin. So wouldn't it be great if Americans actually started living a healthier life using their individual abilities to make themselves healthier, which therefore would make their communities healthier, and then that would decrease the overall cost of care for the entire nation and help us funnel resources that are much needed to those illnesses that we couldn't do anything about.
Amen. Do you get frustrated as a doctor when you make a suggestion or anyone makes a suggestion, hey, we should not eat as much junk food and lose some weight, and you're shamed because you make that suggestion, right? Like you're victim shaming or you're criticizing overweight people or whatever. Do you get frustrated by that?
I'm not going to say I get frustrated, but I will tell you, I give a cancer diagnosis just about every day to someone. And it is in that moment when they say to me, oh, I should have exercised more or I should have changed my diet more. But at that point, we already have the cancer diagnosis. So I'm not going to harp on that. So it's sad to me that it took something devastating, such as a cancer diagnosis, for them to actually have an awareness that maybe they should have made some changes. And, we live in my opinion, the greatest country in the world. We have economic freedoms. And so if you look at Australia, then HPV and cervical cancer. Cervical cancer is one of the cancers that we know is caused by a virus. And we actually have a vaccine for it that could prevent the viral infection from causing cancer. HPV, by the way, is also now linked to oral and throat and a lot of head and neck cancers. So it causes a lot of cancer. So Australia did mandatory HPV vaccine programs, and they effectively have eradicated cervical cancer from their country. In the United States, we have the freedom to choose whether we want to vaccinate or not. And I still support freedoms, although I also support vaccinations. But with freedom comes responsibility. So if you are choosing not to do certain things, have certain vaccinations to you or to your children, do you also still believe that everyone else should be paying for the consequences that may come down the road because of your actions? And for me, that is where my frustration lies.
Yeah, we've built the system so that the answer is yes. This is our last question for you, Doctor. Thanks for being here. You do a little chapter, a short little thing about the beginnings of Blue Cross, which is super fascinating because it started off as like a little kind of tiny, nice thing. and then it just became this behemoth of a whatever the heck it even is now. Why is it important to know what it was? Why did you put that in there?
Well, for me to really understand something, I have to intellectualize things. And that is how I can actually, make some information tangible and understand it. And once you really understand something, then you can actually see how some of these proposed solutions by these legislators are just completely preposterous, and how whether you want to go Medicare for all or completely privatized, nothing's going to work unless we actually fix the fundamental issue of just an overutilization of the system. I really wanted to highlight how just the insertion of third parties, whether it's government, whether it's insurance companies or PBMs, have really disrupted the doctor-patient relationship and how it has crumbled a lot of our healthcare system. And so if we can limit their intrusion, then I truly think that we would get back to a much stronger system and a much stronger nation. And then whichever policy you favor, whether right, left, or somewhere in between, you'd have a lot better chance of that being successful if we're actually able to decrease the overall cost of care through decreased overutilization.
Perfect. I lied, Doctor. One last question. Only about 30 seconds. Not fair for me to do this. But in light of COVID at the end of this, long term, what changes do you see to our healthcare system, good or bad, out of this?
I truly think that we're going to come out much healthier and stronger at the end. All of a sudden, people have more of an awareness of how to wash their hands. And there's been a really big talk about, should we be having flu vaccines to help decrease the burden on our healthcare system? And I think going forward, we're going to have a lot more awareness of making sure that our hospitals aren't running at max capacity. And I'm telling you, as individuals, you have the power to make this happen. My book is easy to read in the sense at the very end, there's an appendix. It's not a wellness book. It's not a self-help book, but there's some easy follow recommendations of how you yourself can live healthier, make your family healthier. And in my opinion, even if a few people did this, we would make our overall nation healthier.
Yeah, perfect timing for this book. It's important. Make America Healthy Again, How Bad Behavior and Big Government Caused $1 trillion Crisis. Dr. Nicole Saphier. Doctor, thank you for your time, and thanks for the book.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bethany Mandel, talk about homeschooling. Coming up next, true story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, we've said from the jump about hopefully one of the things that comes out of this whole COVID experience is that a good number of parents can say, you know what, I can do this homeschool thing. I can see what this could look like and are inspired to learn more about it. And that's why I wanted to talk to Bethany Mandel, editor at Ricochet. How are you, Bethany?
Hey, good, thanks. How are you?
Good, I'm glad you're here. So, loved your article in The Atlantic, actually, the other day about distance learning and how it's not working. Let's define some terms here. So what is distance learning?
So distance learning is what parents are doing right now, and it is not homeschool. It's basically teachers are sending home work. The main thing is they're having classes on Zoom. So they're saying at 10:30, have your kids sitting in front of their computer, and we're going to talk at them through the computer as if we were in the classroom for the next hour. And it's not working. I've heard from dozens of friends and friends of friends because we homeschool, and they say, how do you do this? And the number one thing I say to them is, we are not doing the same thing.
You say we don't. We don't do that. It's amazing that the public school system was a broken model itself, and then we just tried to bring the broken public school model into the home. Like, of course that wouldn't work and is not advisable. So let's one more question about what they're doing. What's the biggest problem with that system in the home?
So a lot of it is that parents are responsible for their kids' education in that they're sort of taskmasters, but they have no say. And so a teacher has decided that at 10:30 they're going to sit down for an hour and learn math, but then maybe another sibling's teacher has decided that at the same time they're going to sit down and learn English. And so mom is having to bounce back and forth between the two kids. And at 10:30, that's when the baby wakes up from her nap and she wants to eat. And also mom has a 10:30 Zoom meeting with her boss, and it's not working. When someone else sets your schedule and when half a dozen other people are setting your schedule, it's bound for catastrophe.
Of course. And then, of course, having your kids sit in front of a computer for 6 hours. I thought we were kind of coming to a consensus that screen time was bad, and now we're just having kids sit in front of screens for longer and longer. Okay, so what mindset should one have for homeschooling instead? How is it fundamentally different?
So you set your own schedule and you set your own priorities. And so my perspective on this is a short-lived experiment for the vast majority of American parents, and they should be spending this time teaching their children things that they won't necessarily be learning in school. And so instead of sitting their kids down in front of the computer and doing a half an hour of math worksheets that are really just busy work, why don't you sit down with them and teach them how to sew or teach them how to cook? There's so many things that have been cut out of public school and private school, honestly, curriculums that should never have been cut. Home economics, art, music. There's so many things that parents can spend this time exposing their children to that are so much more gentle on the family dynamic than having them sit in front of a computer and do a math worksheet.
I love the word gentle there. That was such a good use of the word. What do you mean by gentle?
So gentle is, so it's actually, I took it from the homeschool curriculum we're using next year called a gentle feast. But it's just like a soft way of teaching your kids that doesn't make you into a taskmaster, but it creates a warm environment in your home. And so instead of sitting your kids down in front of a worksheet and sort of barking orders at them, you enjoy homeschooling together. I mean, when I homeschool my children, and I enjoy it, and I sit along with them and listen to the music and think about and talk about the art that we're looking at, and enjoy the stories that we're reading. It's a really slow way of life that's filled with a lot of beauty, and I think that parents have the opportunity to enjoy that during this time as best that they can. And I think it's best for everyone's mental health to take this as an opportunity to slow down a little bit.
God, I'm hearing slow down. I got this word peace, beauty, as opposed to taskmaster, barking orders, worksheets. I mean, there's two totally different worlds.
Yes. Yeah, and it's an experience that I hope that parents come away with some amount of positivity.
Yeah, what do you say, and I want to ask for some more examples, but what do you say to the parent who's like, all right, Bethany, living in utopia land, I'm busy, my husband's busy, we're all busy, we don't have time to look at art together. What do you say to that criticism or concern?
So, I mean, it's a very valid criticism, and this is another reason why these Zoom learning sessions are not working, because in every household, there are parents who have different situations. And so there are some households where someone is unemployed. There are some households where both parents are trying to work remotely. This one-size-fits-all model doesn't really work in a classroom, but it absolutely doesn't work when you have 25 kids with very different home situations at home. But in response to, like, we don't have time to sit and look at art, yes, if you don't have time to sit down and look at art, then you don't have time to oversee your kids' distance learning.
Great point. Great point. Okay, let's talk about some specifics. So one thing I love that you wrote in here was nature journal.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the what that does to a kid's brain and soul when they make a nature journal?
Yeah, it's something that so we follow a curriculum called Charlotte Mason. She was an 18th century educator, and a lot of parents in the homeschool world sort of follow her writing and her philosophy. And this was one of the things that she espoused the importance of, and parents should do it too. And so I also have a nature journal, and there's so many benefits to it. One of the things that I like personally is it makes me stop and really pay attention to the beauty of God's world and the intricacies of a fly's wings. And it's a work of art if you really look closely at a fly's wings or at the leaves of a branch on a branch. But it also is a science lesson. It's an art lesson. But in my house, it's also a lesson in faith and a lesson in really appreciating the wonder that God has instilled in every little detail in our world if we just stop and take a second and look at it.
So beautiful. That's so good. My kids, whenever we go for a walk, they have like an eagle eye for roly-polies. I don't even know what their real name is, right? You know what I mean?
Yes.
They like, it's unbelievable. He sees every roly-poly, both of them. Like, and I, as an adult, just speed past them.
Yep.
You know, and I feel like a nature journal would really help me slow down and help him tune in to all the things around him.
Yeah.
And I love that. Is there an age? Is there an appropriate age, or does it matter at all?
So I started with my daughter when she was about 4.5 or 5. My second child is 5, and we just started a new nature journal for next year, and he did really well with it, actually. So I think 5 is kind of a sweet spot. 4.5, 5, depending if it's a boy or a girl and their personalities. But one of the things that I love about speaking to what you just said is that my kids are showing me things that I wouldn't necessarily see because I have a couple more feet on my kids and too many years of working too fast and moving too fast. And my kids help me slow down. I find that homeschooling in the more traditional sense is just as enriching for me as it is for my kids.
What's something you talk in your article about things you can do with all the kids at once? Again, because we're so stuck in this mindset that you have this age and then this age and then this age, but we got to break through that. So what does that look like?
Yes. So my number one thing is reading out loud. There's a great book called The Read Aloud Handbook by Jim Trelease, and he talks about the vital importance of reading out loud with kids of every age and the educational benefits of doing so. Reading out loud and sparking kids' imagination, instilling in them an ability to sit and just be is something that we don't have now. There's a book called Deep Work by Cal, I don't remember his last name, it starts with an N, but he talks about how our inability to get deep work done is related to the fact that we all have these shortened attention spans because of social media, because of the internet, and sitting down and listening to a book is a lost art and one that we need to bring back for the sake of our society and our civilization.
100%. So there's books you can read for all the kids at the same age or different ages.
Yeah. And so we've read the Chronicles of Narnia. We've read all of the Little House books. We're in the middle of a box set from the Boxcar Children. Costco has really great box sets, surprisingly so, of classic books that are really affordable since everyone's libraries are now closed and they ship to your house. But the reading out loud is the number one thing I say of really good classic books.
Yep. You mentioned a second ago about personalities. So what should parents keep in mind about different personalities between your kids?
Yeah, and that's another sort of benefit of homeschooling is that it's not a one size fits all situation in a classroom, that you really can play to your kids' personalities. And so my number one thing when I am sort of thinking about what our homeschool day is going to look like, what our week and our year is going to look like, is that I keep in mind my two older children's personalities. And so my younger daughter really loves to sit and listen, and she can listen on Audible to a book for literally hours. My son is not that kid, and so I have to think creatively about ways to fit in as much quality learning as I can in like a 10-minute block before I really just lose him. And I have to play to his strengths and his interests. And so if I'm planning a math lesson and I can make it about Super Mario Brothers, that's going to go over a lot better.
Yeah, or you can force him to sit in the chair and give him Ritalin until he sits down and punish him and discipline him nonstop as he would in the school system, right?
Yes.
And call him disobedient and all the rest. Last question for you, Bethany. What can school systems do to help parents make this transition? And this is a fruitless question because the school systems are going to fight parents to ever do this, but what could they do in a perfect world?
Yeah, I mean, they're actually, I was surprised to hear from a lot of teachers about this Atlantic piece saying, thank you. We hate the distance learning too. It's our administrators that are making us do it because they feel like we have to justify to the parents that we should still be getting paid, basically, and that we're still doing things. But what teachers and parents, I've heard, both seem to want is guidance. I've had the luxury of spending years thinking about what I want my homeschool to look like, what I want to focus on. It takes a lot of time to think about that and then to find the best materials. And so teachers should be a helpline, and this would honestly be better for them schedule-wise because they often have kids at home too, and they can't sit down at 10:30 and hold a Zoom class because they don't know what to do with their 3-year-old who's ripping the kitchen apart in the other room. And so if they're able to say, call me at 6:30 while my kids are eating dinner, I'll have a 10-minute conversation with you about what I think your child would best benefit from doing this week. And that way everyone sort of gets what they need as far as individual guidance and structure, and they're not tied to the times of the Zoom conferences, which have been a real challenge for everyone involved.
They become like a teacher becomes like an advisor to you, being the teacher. Love that.
Yes.
Okay, so we got to go here, but I wrote down A Gentle Feast, Charlotte Mason, Read Aloud Handbook, and Deep Work. Any other book I need to look at or resource?
I don't. I mean, those are my 4 favorites. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We nailed them. Beautiful. Bethany Mandel, Ricochet. What's your Twitter, Bethany? Obviously, I follow you, but what does everyone else needs to too?
Bethany Shondark. It's my middle name. SHONDARK.
Beautiful. Thanks, Bethany. Thanks for all you're doing. Thanks for getting the word out.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Let's talk again. Thank you, ma'am. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, let's wrap up the show with another story of there's nothing new under the sun. The plague of Marseille, a bubonic plague outbreak in Marseille, France, 1720. I think we have a painting of it. If you're gonna zoom in there, a lot of people dying. 100,000 people dead. That was half, well, so this population of Marseille was 100,000 and 50,000 people in the city died within 2 years. So half of the city dead. And then another 50,000 north of the city out in the province. So 100,000 people total. The population of the city did not recover until 1765. So it took 45 years, about 2 generations, before the population got back to what it was. So interesting story, back it up. So after there's a plague in 1580 in Marseille, and they set up a sanitation board, the local government did. They made the city's first public hospital. They made a list of credentialed doctors. And most relevant here, they made a sanitation board. So there's something I learned this weekend, which I think is super interesting. We mentioned it in the first segment. The word quarantine, it comes from the Italian word meaning 40 days. It means 40 days. Because in Venice, this was in the 1300s, they would require any ship coming into port to stay outside port for 40 days. So in Marseille, every ship that came to dock, a member of the sanitation board would go meet with the captain, get a list of all the cities that ship's been to, and then cross-reference it with a list of cities that they thought maybe, based on the rumor mill, had a plague at the moment. And if you did, then they would inspect the ship too. They'd inspect all the people in the ship, and then they inspect the cargo for any disease. If they saw anything, you were quarantined for 50, even 60 days, whether it's on the ship, off the port, or even sometimes they'd send you to a different island and you'd stay there for a couple months. Even if you didn't have any sign of illnesses, then 18 days, you still had to sit off the coast for 18 days. So think about how unworkable that system was, right? Let's say a ship was planning on arriving in June, but got hit by some storm and had to dock somewhere else for a couple months while they repair the ship, and then shows up a couple months late in Marseille. And let's just say, because this was the case, that the mayor of Marseille at the time was a main investor in cloth weaving fabric from the Levant, like Iraq, Syria area, and that the cargo on one of these ships was full of weavings from the Levant. So let's just say that this ship skipped the quarantine process and the fabric was infected with fleas that had the plague and 100,000 people died. Let's say that's what happened because that's exactly what happened. And even though there was a death penalty put into effect if you left the city, and the city was surrounded by a wall 2 meters high, which is a lot of it's still there today, to keep people in. As Ron Paul said years ago, walls historically have been used to keep people in, not keep people out. Still, the plague got out of the city and killed another 50,000 people outside of the city. My point here is not just to show that plagues and epidemics are nothing new, because that's obvious. We've talked about so many different plagues in history. But that people have always been weighing the economic interests with a potential for epidemic and in the midst of an epidemic. People have been weighing those two things forever. So even this is nothing new. There's a huge debate about, do we keep locking down? Do we open up? That's nothing new. We've always been having that conversation. No plague ever in history has ever existed in a vacuum. It's always invaded an economic system, right? And because of that, I'm not going to blame people for wanting to figure out how to properly balance that. Even if they disagree with where I or Jesse Kelly or whoever are on different areas of what we need to do, I'm not going to criticize anyone for where they are because we're just trying to figure it out. And we're trying to find that right balance. And people have been trying to find that right balance for centuries. There's a book called, what is it called? Natural Disasters in the Ottoman Empire, Plagues, Famine, and Other Misfortunes. It's a real humdinger of a book. 1851. The first International Sanitary Conference convened in Paris. Its official purpose was to set international health standards, especially the prevention of cholera. But in practice, it wasn't about the disease as much as about the control and security of borders and international commerce. Same thing today. The British, who had opposed quarantine since at least the 1830s, same thing today, on the grounds that it did little to prevent the disease and was a nuisance to trade, right? The Brits were all like, herd immunity, let's not do anything, the same thing. Joined the French and the Austrians in arguing that times had changed, and with rapid communication and transport rendered quarantine ineffective. The Ottomans rejected the approach because of the condescending attitude of the European delegates towards the Orient, and their response that the other parties only cared about preventing cholera in Europe and in controlling European trade routes. Same thing with the Chinese, right? They just want to control the trade routes. Nothing has changed. And the 1851 conference ended with little agreement. There's amazing how much of that is still going on today. The same issues are at play. If anything, only intensified, right? In 1850s, they were talking about, the Brits were like, listen, this quarantine stuff doesn't even do anything. Things are moving so fast these days with ships, right? Like ships, what do you mean fast with ships? Take weeks to get from one place to the next. And they're like, it's so fast, it's out of control. What's the point of quarantine anyway? Well, we're way faster today. This is Nassim Taleb in a speech he gave in 2015.
The risks we face on a daily basis, the real risks are not ISIS, that's bullshit. The thing to think about, the real risk was Ebola, because Ebola can spread. You see, Ebola can accelerate, can spread, these kind of things. And the next Ebola will be facing the first time in history with an epidemic that flies on British Air, you see, and of course Delta, and gets bad food on United, right? Bad treatment by flight attendants. So that's a problem. We never face it because of. So epidemics follow this mode. So when people tell me, let's talk about risk, the first thing I talk about is if ISIS or someone else maybe can accelerate it, but it could be naturally coming, is an epidemic.
He wrote in his book years ago that a pandemic will definitely happen and spread really quickly around the world now because of air travel, which we've never had before. And people back in the 1800s were like, pandemics there's nothing you can do to control them because we have ships now, right? There's nothing new under the sun. For whatever reason, that gives me great peace. Slater Crusaders, hope you enjoyed the show today. We'll do it again tomorrow. True story, Mike Slater, spread the word.